Joe Montana is worth an estimated $150 million, but you probably wouldn't guess it from how he lives. Instead of a massive mansion, endless supercars, and an extravagant lifestyle, the NFL legend reportedly keeps things surprisingly simple. Let me break it down. Let's start with the number everyone throws around, $150 million. That's the figure that shows up on every net worth tracker, every richest retired athletes list, every ranking of NFL legends who cashed in after football. As of 2024, Joe Montana's net worth is an impressive $150 million. And here's the part that should stop you cold. This substantial figure might surprise some fans, considering that Montana's NFL career earnings totaled a relatively modest $25.5 million. Read that again. $25.5 million from 16 seasons of professional football, 4 Super Bowl wins, 3 Super Bowl MVP trophies. That's less than what a single decent NFL starting quarterback makes in one season today. By comparison, Joe Burrow earned $55 million from the Bengals in the 2023 season alone. Montana played his entire career and didn't clear half that. So where did the other $125 million come from? That's the real story here, and we'll get into the mechanics of it. But first, you need to see how he actually lives, because it doesn't match the number at all. According to Sportskeeda, Montana and his wife Jennifer currently reside in San Francisco's Marina neighborhood, and it's not some penthouse. Joe Montana, who retired from football a long time ago, and his spouse Jennifer Montana presently reside in a 2-bedroom condominium in San Francisco's Marina neighborhood. According to the LA Times, featuring 1,873 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, parquet wood flooring, arched windows and doors, 1,873 square feet for a man worth $150 million. That's smaller than a lot of suburban family homes owned by people who've never thrown a football in their life. Now, this isn't the whole story of where Montana has lived. He's had bigger, much bigger. We'll get to that. But the point right now is this: the man with 9 figures to his name chose, at this stage of his life, to downsize into something almost anyone could picture themselves living in. Not a compound, not a gated hillside estate with a private security detail, a condo. And it's not like he stumbled into wealth and doesn't know what to do with it. Montana isn't just sitting on old football money. Montana has since transitioned to a role in a venture capital firm, making a massive success of his second career. He made much more money from venture capital investments than he ever did from his salary and sponsorships during his playing career. This is a guy who is, right now, actively managing money at a scale that dwarfs anything he earned throwing touchdown passes. He knows exactly how big his bank account is, and he still lives in 2 bedrooms in the Marina. To understand why that's such a strange contradiction, you have to understand what Montana actually was on the field, because the gap between legendary enough to have $150 million and modest enough to live in 1,873 square feet only gets weirder once you know what he accomplished. The Sporting News editors placed Montana 3rd on their list of the 100 greatest players in football in 1999, and he is recognized as the NFL's 4th greatest NFL player of all time. Joe was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2000. He won 4 Super Bowls with the San Francisco 49ers and picked up 3 Super Bowl MVP awards along the way, a record that decades later still puts him in a category almost nobody else occupies. Having been inducted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2000, Montana was the first player in the history of the NFL to win 3 Super Bowl MVP honors. This is not a guy who had a quiet career and stumbled into money later. He was, and still is, one of the most recognizable athletes to ever play the sport. Nicknamed Joe Cool for the way he operated in the 4th quarter of games that mattered most, he built a legacy that turned into a licensing goldmine the moment he retired. But the salary tells a different story than the legacy. Despite being one of the best players in the NFL, Montana's salary did not reflect the contribution he made to the 49ers. He made a very meager $25.5 million during his NFL career. Even his best year on a paycheck wasn't close to what modern stars pull in. The most he earned in a single season with the Chiefs was $4 million in the 1993-94 season. Adjusted for today's dollars, that's still nowhere near what a franchise quarterback commands now. So Montana retired in the mid-90s with a Hall of Fame resume and a bank account that, by modern superstar standards, looked almost ordinary. And that's exactly where this story gets interesting, because everything that turned $25 million into $150 million happened after he stopped playing. The rings were earned on the field. The fortune was built somewhere else entirely. That's also where the normal life question starts to make more sense. and starts to make less sense depending on how you look at it. Because the man who built that fortune didn't do it by chasing the biggest house or the flashiest toys. He did it quietly, through a completely different game, using the same instincts that made him dangerous in a 2-minute drill. And along the way, he actually did build the big house, the biggest one you can imagine. Then he walked away from it. To understand how someone goes from a $25 million career to a $150 million fortune, and then chooses a 2-bedroom condo over a palace, you have to follow the money in order. It starts with endorsements, it moves into venture capital, and it runs straight through a 500-acre Tuscan villa in wine country that he built, tried to sell for tens of millions, and eventually left behind for good. Let's start with how the endorsement checks turned into the first real fortune. When Montana hung up his cleats in the mid-90s, the traditional playbook for a retired quarterback was simple: do some commercials, maybe get a broadcasting gig, coast on name recognition. Montana did the commercials. Endorsement deals with major brands like Guinness, Schick, Papa John's, MasterCard, and AT&T have been a significant source of income for Montana. And unlike most athletes, whose endorsement money dries up within a few years of retirement, Montana's kept flowing and eventually outpaced what he made playing the game. Notably, Joe has earned substantially more from endorsements in retirement than he did during his playing career. That alone should have been the headline of his post-football life. A guy who made $25.5 million playing quarterback, out-earning that career total, just from doing TV spots for beer and pizza. But endorsements were only the appetizer. The real shift, the one that actually explains the $150 million, happened when Montana stopped thinking like a retired athlete cashing checks and started thinking like an investor. Post-retirement, Joe Montana transitioned to the world of venture capitalism. This wasn't a vanity project or a celebrity name slapped on somebody else's fund. Montana got into the actual mechanics of investing, and he got in early on companies that would go on to become some of the biggest names in tech. Co-founding Liquid 2 Ventures, Montana invested in companies that have flourished, including Pinterest, Airbnb, Robinhood, and GitLab. But before Liquid 2 Ventures even existed, Montana had already spent years figuring out how money actually moves in Silicon Valley. And it happened almost by accident, through the people he was already surrounded by. As a 49er, Montana was living in the same neighborhoods as some of the most powerful venture capitalists in the country, years before most athletes even knew what a venture capitalist was. He explained it directly in an interview with CNBC, describing how former teammates Harris Barton and Ronnie Lott came to him with the idea of building a fund of funds. Because we lived around all the guys who were running Sequoia, Kleiner, Excel, all the top-tier funds, we're going to leverage our friendships into access. That access turned into HRJ Capital in 1998, a venture firm Montana co-founded that grew far bigger than most people realize. By 1998, Montana had co-founded the venture capital firm, HRJ Capital, and in the subsequent 8 years, its assets under management amounted to over $900 million. Nearly $1 billion under management, run in part by a retired quarterback who, a few years earlier, was calling audibles against the Green Bay defense. Then life pulled him in a different direction for a while. Montana later moved 2 hours away from San Francisco to the Napa wine country, forcing him to step back from investing before he connected with angel investor Ron Conway, because their kids attended the same school. That school pickup friendship turned out to be worth more than most business deals. The co-founder of SV Angel introduced Montana to tech incubator Y Combinator and encouraged him to start his own fund, Liquid 2, in 2015. Liquid 2 Ventures wasn't a side hobby with Montana's name attached for star power. Liquid 2 Ventures is an American venture capital firm based in San Francisco, California, founded and managed by former American football player Joe Montana. He co-founded it alongside partners, and together they went hunting for seed-stage startups before anyone else had heard of them. In 2016, Joe and partners Mike Miller, Michael Ma, and Nathaniel Montana raised the first fund for Liquid 2 Ventures, a micro fund focused on seed-stage investment. One of those early seed bets became the biggest single validation of Montana's second career. Liquid 2 Ventures provided seed investment to the open-source software startup GitLab, which had a valuation of $12 million at the time, with Ashton Kutcher among the other angel investors in the same round. 6 years later, that tiny $12 million company went public in a way nobody could have predicted. Fast forward 6 years later to October 2021, and GitLab had its IPO with a valuation of an astounding $10 billion. Think about that trajectory. A software company Montana bet on when it was worth $12 million went on to be valued at $10 billion. That single investment, scaled across his stake, is the kind of return no NFL contract in history could ever produce. And GitLab wasn't a one-off. Today, Liquid 2's footprint is enormous. His firm now counts more than 800 portfolio companies and over 20 unicorns from its first fund, including early stakes in GitLab and Anduril. Montana himself has been candid about the fact that this second act isn't just a retirement hobby. He described the difference between his old fund of funds model and Liquid 2's hands-on approach directly, saying the earlier version just required writing checks. But this required something else entirely: real involvement in the founders and the companies from the earliest stages. When asked directly what Liquid 2's numbers actually looked like, he laid it out without spin. If you look at success, fund I was $28 million. We returned the fund I 0.8 times X, and we still have 21 unicorns in the fund. Read that carefully. The fund technically didn't even return more money than investors put in on a straight multiple basis, 0.8 times, and yet it still produced 21 unicorn companies sitting inside it. That's how skewed venture returns can get. A handful of massive winners can make an entire portfolio historically significant even while the headline number looks modest. And Montana's team found those winners at the ground floor, years before Wall Street ever heard their names. By the time you add it all up, the endorsement checks that kept coming long after his playing days, the near billion-dollar HRJ Capital run, and the venture bets that turned into unicorns, you start to see exactly how a $25.5 million football career quietly became a $150 million fortune. None of it required a bigger house. None of it required flash. It required relationships, patience, and the same read the defense instincts he used in the pocket, just pointed at term sheets instead of blitz packages. But here's the twist. Even as the venture money piled up, Montana didn't stay modest the whole way through. There was a period where he built something enormous. A property so large and so lavish it makes the current two-bedroom condo almost impossible to believe. And that's the part of the story that actually explains everything. If you want proof that Montana's current modest life wasn't the only path available to him, you don't have to look far. You just have to look at Napa Valley. In the late 1990s, Joe and wife Jennifer Montana built an Italian villa-style home on a 500-acre estate in Knights Valley, and it took them 5 years to complete. They called it Villa Montana, and calling it a house barely does it justice. This wasn't a big backyard and a pool. The Hall of Fame quarterback and San Francisco 49ers legend was asking $28.9 million for the 9,700 square foot, 3-bedroom Tuscan-style villa and surrounding land when it eventually went up for sale. The design alone tells you how far this went beyond a normal celebrity house. Montana and his wife Jennifer spent 5 years designing and building it, furnishing it with Italian marble floors, a Parisian marble bathtub, and a 17th century church altar. A church altar in a private residence. Among its features were a wine cellar that could hold 3,500 bottles, a separate cellar for olive oil, a swimming pool, a basketball court, a shooting range, a guest house studio, and a caretaker's cottage. Turreted towers gave a full sweeping view of Mount St. Helena from the top of the property. This is the version of Joe Montana that matches the $150 million number. Horse stables, 30 of them. According to one detailed account of the property, an enclosed riding arena, meandering trails, ponds you could canoe across. A family compound built for a man who, at the time, had every reason to live as big as his bank account allowed. And for a while, that's exactly what the family did. The Land Report's interview with Montana painted a picture of the estate as the center of family life after football ended. Cookouts, campouts, and kids exploring acres of rolling hills. Year-round creeks wound through the hollows. A full-size basketball court was built for his sons. His daughters and wife got their own professional-grade equestrian center, complete with 17 heated stalls. A skeet shooting range was built in a secluded pasture, and Joe was the only member of the family who engaged in all of it. But the interesting part isn't that Montana built this, it's that he eventually walked away from it, and it took years to actually happen. His asking price of $28.9 million was significantly less than his original asking price when he first listed the home in 2009 for $49 million. And that earlier sale, where the price was dropped to $35 million by 2012, never happened. For a full decade, Montana tried on and off, to let go of the biggest physical symbol of his wealth, and for a full decade, it didn't sell. Part of the delay wasn't even about money. Montana's kids reportedly asked him to keep the home, but have since grown up and moved out on their own. The villa wasn't just real estate to the family. It was the place where his kids grew up after football ended, which is exactly why letting go of it took so long, even for a man who could clearly afford to hang on to it indefinitely if he wanted to. By the time the estate was back on the market in 2019, Montana had already relocated his day-to-day life elsewhere. Montana, who runs a venture capital firm these days, resides full-time in San Francisco. The Napa property had become something he visited rather than lived in, a museum of a previous chapter. Still beautiful, still enormous, but no longer where his actual life was happening. That's the version of Montana most people picture when they hear $150 million net worth, wine cellars, church altars, 500 acres. And it's real. He built it, he lived in it, he raised his family in it. But it's also the version he eventually stepped back from, piece by piece, until what was left was a condo in the marina. That transition is the whole answer to why a $150 million fortune ends up looking so unassuming today. Montana didn't lose the estate. He didn't downsize because he had to. He downsized because the life that mattered to him, the one built around family, wine, and land, had already run its course once his kids grew up and left. The villa's purpose was raising 4 children in the country. Once that job was finished, the house had done its job too. And that shift says more about Montana's actual relationship with money than any bank statement could. The fortune was never really the point. The estate wasn't built to impress anyone. It was built because he had kids who wanted stables and creeks and a basketball court, and he happened to be able to give it to them at a scale most people can't imagine. Once that need disappeared, so did his interest in maintaining a 9,700 square foot house designed around it. Which brings us to what's actually happening at Villa Montana's replacement, the wine, the routine, and the version of retirement that a $150 million man actually chose for himself once the big estate had done its work. So if the estate wasn't really about wealth for its own sake, what was Montana actually chasing once he had the money to do anything he wanted? The answer isn't flashy, it's wine. Around the same time he was building Villa Montana, Montana was teaming up with then Beringer winemaker Eds Bergia to make a Cabernet Sauvignon that could be primarily sold at charity events, after the two had met at a wine auction. This wasn't a celebrity slapping his name on a bottle for a marketing bump. It was a personal project, born from an actual friendship with a winemaker, aimed mostly at charity rather than profit. The wine, called Montegia, cost $75 when it was released in 1999. And a bottle listed today runs an average price of $225. That's a nice appreciation, sure, but it's not exactly the kind of number that moves a $150 million net worth. This was never the point. Montana explained his own motivation for getting into wine in a way that had nothing to do with business at all, telling ABC News that he had given up football many years earlier and was now involved with grapes instead, adding that what actually drew him in wasn't the process of making the wine. It was the enjoyment of drinking it, something he and Jennifer both loved. That quote tells you everything about how Montana approaches this stage of his life. He's not chasing a new empire to replace the football one. He found something he and his wife genuinely enjoyed, and he built a small, mostly charitable project around it. Compare that instinct to the venture capital side of his life, where he's managing a fund with over 800 portfolio companies. And you start to see 2 very different versions of the same man operating side by side. One Montana is deeply engaged in billion-dollar tech exits. The other Montana just wants a good glass of Cabernet with his wife. A local account of his move into wine country captured this contradiction well, describing how it would have been easy to assume that a quarterback as smooth and stylish as Montana would find retirement empty without football to fill it. Instead, the piece observed that Montana, through his own uncomplicated manner, seemed to be finding real satisfaction in life's basic pleasures, spending time with family, working the barbecue, tending the land, and laughing whenever he got the chance. Uncomplicated. That's not a word you'd expect attached to a Hall of Famer with a $150 million portfolio and a venture fund holding stakes in 20-plus unicorns, but multiple accounts of Montana's actual day-to-day point in the same direction. He's not running from cameras or hiding from fame. He still does interviews, still sits down with CNBC and acquired and startup podcasts to talk shop about Liquid 2's next fund. He's simply not organizing his life around the size of his bank account. That shows up in how he talks about his current work too. When asked directly about why his venture model looks different from other athlete-run funds, Montana didn't lean into the celebrity angle at all. He pointed out that a lot of former athletes who start venture firms make the mistake of thinking they can put their name on it and let someone else run the operation. But that's not how he works. He said flatly that it's a day-to-day world and that he has to actually be in it, stepping in when something needs correcting and otherwise letting his team operate while he oversees things. That's a man still fully engaged in building something, just without needing anyone to see the size of the house he's building it from. The condo in the marina isn't a retreat from success. It's simply where he decided the next chapter of his life should happen. Once the kids were grown, the estate had done its job, and the wine cellar full of Montagia had already served its purpose at enough charity auctions to matter. And that ultimately is the answer buried underneath the $150 million headline. The fortune is real. The endorsements, the venture returns, the GitLab windfall, the 20-plus unicorns. None of that is exaggerated. Montana built one of the more remarkable second careers of any retired athlete in modern sports, turning a middling NFL salary into a fortune that rivals or exceeds what most of his peers ever earned on the field. He had, and still has, the means to live in anything he wants. He proved that with 500 acres, a church altar, and 30 horse stables. But the man behind that number spent 5 years building a monument to family life, watched his kids grow up inside it, and then let it go once that chapter closed. He picked wine over yachts. He picked a 2-bedroom condo over a Tuscan villa. He picked showing up, day to day, to run his own venture fund rather than putting his name on a building and disappearing. Joe Montana didn't get quiet because the money ran out. He got quiet because, once he had already lived the biggest version of wealthy life available to him, he decided the smaller one suited him better. That's not a fall from grace. That's a man who tried it all. The estate, the excess, the empire, and chose, on his own terms, to come back down to something closer to normal.